Okay, so in addition to using homologous traits to design a phylogeny, we can also use shared derived traits. So shared derived traits are those that evolved after the last common ancestor. So if you were to look at a lineage, you got your branches, and you find that node, the node represents the last common ancestor. So we're seeing a trait that evolved after that divergence. Okay, does that make sense? So the idea is that the more closely related species is, then they're going to share more derived characters. Okay? What about ancestral traits? So ancestral traits are those that were inherited from a common ancestor. So it's different. So it means it was there in that last common ancestor, and then the subsequent lineages got that. They inherited that. So let's take a look. Look at the phylogenetic tree, and let's take a look at the turtle lineage and the leopard lineage. So find that node. You see that node is that represents the last common ancestor? Okay. So hair is which? Which, is that a shared derived trait for leopards, or is it an ancestral trait for turtles and leopards? So hair is a shared derived trait for leopards and all other mammals, because it occurred after the divergence. Okay, so look at that node. What would be an ancestral trait? Good, the amniotic egg. And why is that? It's because you see that the amniotic egg went through the turtle lineage, so that means it's present in the turtles, and it went down the lineage to the leopards. So it's present in both lineages. Any questions about that? Okay. So what do we call these organisms in our tree? They're called taxa. They're singular taxon. So these groups of organisms are grouped according to their similarity, their shared derived traits. Okay, so each is a taxon. Let's look at this phylogeny. So we have a few more mammals in this one. Go ahead and find lungs. Find lungs on your tree. Okay, find that node and look at it and see that it's an ancestral trait for salamanders, lizards, tigers, gorillas, and humans. You see why that is? So if you were to look at those branches and trace them back, you'll see that there's that last common ancestor, right? There is that node there. So yes, we can see that lungs are present in all of them. What about bipedalism? So find bipedalism. So it's up there. So where is it relative to that node? So it's showing we have a divergence with gorillas and humans, right? So if we look at that node, we can see that bipedalism evolved after humans and other primates diverged. Okay? And some of you may wonder about the lamprey, what's going on with the lamprey. So the lamprey is used as an outgroup, and we use that as a reference group because they are more distantly related, and it helps construct our tree. Okay, so go ahead and find tail loss on here. So find the trait tail loss. Is that an ancestral trait or is it a derived trait? So where is it in relation to the node? Yeah, it is an ancestral trait because that trait of not having a tail is seen in those lineages. Good. All right. So let's look at this evolutionary tree. We're comparing various species of carnivores. So when we talk about evolutionary relationships, let's talk about species again. So remember we talked about the definition of species a little while back. We talked about morphological, ecological, and the biological definitions and how each of them had some shortcomings. Well, if we're talking about evolutionary relationships, shouldn't we have some definition of species that includes our understanding of evolution? So what is evolution? Remember, it's the change in allelic frequencies over time. Okay, so that's the genetic basis. So let's have an understanding of what species are based on genetics. And this is what the phylogenetic species concept does. Okay, so species is a population or set of populations characterized by one or more shared derived characters. So you can have subpopulations that comprise a larger population, right? You have a set of populations that comprise the species. So we're saying that at some level that they are different. There's something that distinguishes them genetically from others. So this definition of species is based on genetics, uses these derived characters. And some may argue that this is a better definition, it's much more informative, and it's more accurate. So let's look at our tree now. Let's take a look. So find the Arctic fox up there, and then towards the bottom, find the gray fox. Okay, so if you didn't look at that tree, would you assume that the two species of fox would be more similarly related? I mean, they're both foxes, right? And yet when we look at this tree, what do we see? That they're actually not as related as we thought they would be. So around 13 million years ago, we see that there's a divergence. And you can see the gray wolf lineage and the island fox lineage over here. And you can see this branched out many, many, many branches. Eventually we get the Arctic fox over here. Interesting, huh? So genetically speaking, and from the derived characters, is that they are more divergent. And look at this thing, this raccoon dog. I don't know what that is, but it's more closely related to the Arctic fox, right? So the morphological species concept it definitely has some issues, right? Because we can see right here. Okay, well, what about dog, gray wolf, and coyote? And many of us would think, well, wouldn't coyotes and gray wolves be more genetically similar than our dog? But looking at the tree, you can see that the dog and the gray wolf actually are more genetically similar. And that the divergence occurred, it was a recent divergence, but still nonetheless, is that the coyotes are more distant. Okay? Do you have questions about how to read this tree or how to analyze it? No? All right. So now we have a better understanding of species. How do we organize these species? So taxonomy is the science of classifying species in a hierarchical model. And it's universally used. It was developed by Carl Linnaeus, so sometimes it's called the Linnaean system. So what do I mean by hierarchy? So look at the picture there. You have domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. And you'll probably put that to your memory very soon. So we start out really broad. It'd be like taking this class. You have many different kinds of students here saying, okay, let's separate you into a light-colored hair, dark-colored hair, and then dark-colored hair, straight and curly, and that kind of thing. I'm getting more specific. And that's what happens. You can see that species are really specific. So Carl Linnaeus also created this binomial nomenclature. It's a two-name naming system. So we use genus and species. So we're familiar with Homo sapiens, so that's our genus and species. So to give you another example, California sea lion. So the genus, we're at this level, genus Zaphilis, species level, Californianus. Okay, so that is what we would use for binomial. All right. Using what you just learned, let's see if you've ever wondered this. Where you and your cat's lineages diverge. You want to know how closely related you are to your cat from an evolutionary standpoint. So go ahead. At what point do you guys diverge? What we see here is that Eukarya, Animalia, Chordata, Mammalia, here it is at the order level. So carnivora, primates, Felidae, Hominidae, Felis, Homo. So a cat we would say is Felis catus, or I've also heard Felis domesticus. We are Homo sapiens. Okay? So use that information to answer the question, where does the leopard and house cat lineage diverge? So of course we're pretty confident that they're going to be more related than you are to your cat. All right, so they're in the same class, order, family. It's the genus level that they diverge. So Panthera, so we have Panthera pardus. Questions? Feel good about that? Okay. So our last phylogenetic tree. So we have this tree of species this imaginary